What is private is another domain. But my personal is my political. Whether I have rights inside the house is determined by what kind of legal rights I have outside. As soon as you live by the law and you live by ethics, you are not wanted in the system. All the iron corridors that are being created in Hinduism is all non-Hindu. I didn't know how to dig the earth. I didn't know how to tether the animal. I didn't know how to grow my own food. And she knew all that. So what was I coming to tell her?
Hello, everybody. I have a very special guest I'm talking to today. Every time I speak to her, I understand things better, more deeply. For anyone looking at activism as their modus operandi, her life offers a philosophical underpinning or framework. For over 50 years, Aruna Roy has worked at the grassroots, mobilizing people to compel the state to enact laws that offer them rights and a greater chance at justice. She's taken this rich life that she's lived, her life experience, and put it in this latest book, The Personal is Political, an Activist Memoir. I'm delighted to be talking again to Aruna Roy. Aruna, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you for having me.
Aruna, to be an activist is never easy. It has never been easy. But in the past decade, it has, I think I won't be overstating things, will I, if I say it has been downright hazardous.
Actually, who is an activist? An activist is somebody, and I think it's universal that we all feel terrible when we see poverty, injustice, when we see things that are not going the right way. The activist only is only a person who acts on that feeling and assumption, that disturbance that disturbs that person's lives, makes that individual act. It's quite odd that in the trajectory in the last 50, 40 years, the first time I left the Indian Administrative Service to become a social worker, the usual appellative that they attached to my name was ki tyag karke aayi hai, that is, she sacrificed. Within 30 years, somebody who sacrificed has become the enemy of the nation. This trajectory has to be linked to a lot of political situations that have changed, to a lot of political assumptions that have changed, to the kind of economics that we face today, to the understanding of relationships between people who have and the people who don't have, the whole notion of international finance, the notion of development, of investment. That's why when you go into structural debates, people are very wary. If you just make a universal statement, then people all agree with you. And I'm afraid that what pushes a person who takes action on the inequality and injustice is a desire for logic, for rationality, and for constitutional validity. The Constitution is actually the kind of democratic scripture that we go by. And that democratic scripture has to support your activities and also tell you that you're not erring, because you need a self-correcting mechanism. It's in this that you have to function. See, we function in a moral universe. We function in an ethical universe. So for us, it's not only important to see that your public action is ethical, but there is a continual questioning of your personal action. And that is why personal is political. This is both the public action and something of what personal questions arise from it and vice versa.
Why did you do that tyag? Why did you give up the career in the IS? Because it was so coveted at that time. It still is. We are talking when, a young IS probationer has been exposed for falsifying claims to sit for exams, identity, disability, eligibility. So it is still very coveted. It is still very powerful, and it is still seen as a chance to effect social change where it matters the most. Why did you, in the 70s, give up the IS, reject what the IS was offering you as a career and as a path to what you wanted to do?
Because there's so many facets to the decision. One thing I'd like to say is that when I joined the service, I don't know, when people join for very many different reasons. I joined for the service for the simple reason that I thought I would be able to work for collective good. What my few years in the service made me realize is that it's a huge machine, and you join this machine as a small cog. And for many years, or sometimes forever, you're not able to do a damn thing. So you just go on moving this machine, knowing that it's not moving in the right direction, yet being helpless because you're just a cog. This notion of just walking in and designing something and one policy and everything going all the right way is not true at all. So you're really going in for service, and you think you're going in for service to the people in line with constitutional values. But when you go in, you realize that you're doing service for the vested interests. And then come very, very strong questions as to whether you want to continue to work for vested interests. And if you don't work, then what are the consequences of it? You'll be sent to the boondocks. And boondocks in terms of being sent somewhere is all right. Being boondocks in terms of being sent to the remote corners of India to work is fine, because even there people need. But the moment you go there, the same variables are operating. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you live by the law and you live by ethics, you are not wanted in the system. And then there was corruption. There was so much corruption. This is also corruption. This is arbitrary use of the law by the vested interests in power is again corruption. So I realized that power itself needed to be questioned. This kind of arbitrary power and unilateral power needed to be questioned. So one reason why I left the civil service is I wanted to be powerful in ethics, powerful in morality, and use my power for helping people rather than helping vested interests in the system. And there was, in my terms, there was no choice really. You had to be.
So, in some movies and in some TV shows, famously a show called Udaan, which emerged in the 80s, this concept of the IAS officer, the IPS officer as being in service of the people and who would actually make the change that India wanted to see. Are you saying that's a romanticized notion when you saw it up close? And today in all your interactions with the IAS, and there are many over the years that you have had, do you feel that these are all romanticized notions? And your desire to work and question ethics and to question power and to work in an ethical, moral manner, do you think it's still a decision that you hold that was a good one today in the context of how it is?
I do. I still hold I took the right decision, because in all this hullabaloo and in all this great hype and everything that you see today, point me one person who has been able to make the kind of change that was brought in by the RTI. Tell me another person who was able to enact PNREGA. Tell me a third person who brought in the National Food Security Act. Tell me a fifth person who was able to ensure and guarantee the tribals that they have a right to forests. And I can go on. You can't as the civil service. You are under the orders of the elected representatives, the politicians. In the hierarchy, in the pecking order, you come below the politicians. And to change the values of the politicians and the political party needs to move heaven and earth. And in that, if you're a single IAS officer who contests as well vested interests, you're persona non grata. But if you're free, then you can mobilize and people come to you. And the same set of good IAS officers in the service can respond to you, because you become another power structure. What happens when people get together and mobilize into a civil society action group, whether it's a campaign or a people's movement, we represent then power. We represent the power of the Constitution. The Constitution says that we are the sovereign. So sovereign power comes to you to contest representative power. So you have to choose between two powers. And yet at that time, several very good IAS officers, several very good police service officers have come out of the way to help us. But they needed the push and they needed the strength to contest electoral representatives. They needed that power to contest people who were representatives in terms of party politics. Even within political parties, there were so many people who came to help. But they had to fight battles within their own political parties to support this kind of agenda. But this push was required from outside. So I don't believe, I think they're romantic stories. There are some things that can be done, like I have great regard for a police, for an IS officer called Mr. S.R. Shankar, who was the Andhra cadre. He has taught me many things in life. He was a man of absolute ethics, but he was willing to give up everything. Everything. That's why he was remarkable. But most people are not willing to give up everything. There are a few others. I could count them on my fingertips of my two hands. The numbers who really were willing to give up everything for the job that they were in, for the constitution that they upheld, and for the people they came to care for. But they are very few.
And in the past decade, we've seen lateral hires at the joint secretary level, where people who did not come, via the route that of the union of the UPSC happen. We now know that IS officers can be part of organizations, can be members of organizations like the RSS. Will that continue to dilute the role and scope of the civil service and the IS as you see it?
Let me first tell you that you need a permanent civil service. So, mind you, if you look at all that we have done, we've protested against them all the time. But we need a permanent civil service. I went to Mexico. I've traveled all over the world for RTI because it's drawn me into many other national debates. It's taken me all over the country, all over the world in terms of political debate on movements and what movements can do and what are these laws and how to get them framed and so on. And in Mexico, when I was there, they said, you're very lucky you have a permanent civil service because there's a continuity and a continued accountability. When you engage people on contract, they stay for 5 years. They can make as much money as they wish. They can ruin the policy. They can ruin everything, governance, and they can go away and they can just up and go abroad. They can run away. They can be untraceable. And there is no real long-term accountability, which is a kind of reign of the power that they hold. So a permanent civil service is in the interest of the people. A contracted civil service is in the interests of politicians, political parties, and in terms of vested interest in terms of money, investors, profit makers, people who break the rules but who want quick money. They want quick decisions, quick implementation, and then they want no accountability. So when you have these lateral entries, I am quite worried. And I would like to know on what grounds and what are the terms of agreement by which these lateral entries come to work for the system. I would really be worried. And so far as joining an organization like the RSS is concerned, then all government servants should be given total freedom to join campaigns, to join movements, to join Congress, to join CPM, to join CPI, to join any other group that has similar movements going. They should allow them all. Then it's fine. But why choose only the RSS? That in my case is incorrect, unethical, and completely without integrity. Because you're pushing them into a certain political position where they will applaud you, promote you, maybe underwrite all your misdemeanors so that they can carry on for as long as they wish. And you can bargain with them that if you don't, we will get rid of you, or if you do it, we'll give you the best post. I don't think it's the right thing to do.
Aruna, let's go to the title of your book, The Personal is the Political. It is a slogan of the feminist movement. And you write saying that it is not just because of the feminist origin, but because of the democratic logic to this sentence. I want you to explain this. I want you to amplify it, because through the book, what you do is you keep coming back. This statement becomes a touchstone for many of the actions or the choices that you've made, isn't it?
Every kind of public action affects you personally. I mean, if I vote for somebody, it's not just a vote I'm casting publicly. It affects the choices that that person will make in parliament, which impacts me. For instance, if I do elect a party in power which goes and restricts women's rights, it directly affects me. Or if I vote a party in power which promotes MNREGA, it promotes my ideology, my personal ideology, that there should be work and employment for the poor. For Northi, whose photo is at the back, it directly talks about Northi's right to live a decent and dignified life, who's my friend. So how is it not personal? I think personal and political are divides which we are which we have to draw, but impact each other. They are, in a sense, plated together. But what I would say, the third concept of private, my privacy, I will not forego. What is private is another domain. But my personal is my political. Whether I have rights inside the house is determined by what kind of legal rights I have outside as a wife, what legal rights I have as a woman, what legal rights I have as a sister, a daughter, or whatever. Even land rights, whether I'll get my right to the share of ancestral property, lies in the passage of a law. And democracy is vital, because democracy basically grants me equality. And through the constitution, it firms it up and says I have equal rights. So as a woman, for me, democracy as a process, as a form of government, and the constitution as a document, which is the basic document defining democracy, are vitally important.
You talk about growing up, with your mother, and how even though she was not, I mean, she didn't pursue a career, and she felt the lack of doing that, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about what is it that attracted you, or what is it that inspired you to become an activist?
I wasn't born an activist. I was born a girl with a great desire to learn and think and grow. As a mother, she enabled me to grow. She talked about me. I had the most marvelous set of parents. And I think I consider myself one of the most privileged in the world for having a mother who did physics, mathematics, and Sanskrit, topped the university, and didn't take up a profession, who was a tennis player, who was a veena player, and who brought to her children all the richness of that as education. The thing she lamented was that she didn't have time to pursue her interest of research in fundamental physics, which was denied to her because of her marriage. So her argument with us was that if you want to pursue knowledge or pursue something very, very strongly, then marriage must not come in the way. Marriage is all right, it's an institution, you have to get married, but it's not important. An argument that was hardly preferred by her peers in India at that time. They all wanted their daughters settled. Married, and
to a suitable boy,
husbanded and with children. So that in that way, she was a revolutionary in her time, and she brought the world to me. I knew about Archimedes when I was a child. I knew about Kepler. I knew about Ramanujam. I knew about so many things as a child. So what she brought to me was the entire world. She brought the Greek thinkers to me. She brought Greek myths to me. She brought Indian myths to me. She brought, the world to me through her education. So she felt that whatever we grew up as or to be, there must be some ways of expressing ourselves. And that only comes for a woman with a profession. Unfortunately, if you're at home, you're always seen as a domestic utility. And she resented being seen as a domestic utility alone. She also sang and played the veena beautifully. So the veena playing that she did, again, got very restricted. So she felt, therefore, that some method of self-expression was very, very important. So leaving the home was essential for a woman. And I grew up with that idea and thought. So for me to get into the IAS was not important. But to get out and seek a space for self-expression was very, very important. Yeah.
You talk about being a cultural Hindu. I want you to elaborate that, because we are living in a time where the political Hindu is an identity which a lot of people claim, and Hindutva and majoritarian politics coming or linking into that idea of the political Hindu has been dominant for the past decade. In that context, how do you explain being a cultural Hindu? I think that will resonate a lot with people.
You see, it's a tough question, but I think I've asked for it. See, being a cultural Hindu, that I wear a bindi. I sit in front of you with such a huge bindi. I wear a sari. I dress, not because I'm forced to, but I dressed in the code. My dress code is very Hindu, if you like. But if you go to Bangladesh, you can contest that. Because in Bangladesh, many Muslim women dress as I do. My friend Khushi Kabir wears this. So that's why I called it cultural Hindu, not religious Hindu, because it can also cross religious boundaries. I have been brought up in many things which are derived from classical culture. And classical culture was defined by people who were Hindus in one sense, in that classical music, for instance, Bharata's Natya Shastra, for instance. I also learned Bharatanatyam. That was also ruled by concepts and precepts which trace you back to Hinduism. I also have a liking for many of the beauties of this country, which come from its musical tradition, its dance tradition, its architectural tradition. But I think when I talk about the architectural tradition and the music tradition, I live partly in the Hindu cultural vein, but I also live in the Mughal cultural vein. It's an Indian culture, if you like. I think that the buildings that are so beautiful in New Delhi, which were put up by the Mughals, one of my favorite places, the Humayun's tomb. The second most favorite place for me is the Lodi Gardens. And the third most favorite place is Safdarjung's tomb for me in Delhi. I feel I grew up with them, and I think they're beautiful buildings. They're lovely places, and I would go back to them. But that doesn't mean I do not appreciate the Kanchipuram temple or the Madurai temple, that I do not appreciate Konarak, that I do not appreciate other aspects of Hindu culture that have come to be. So I can't say I will not. And then I very often go to a temple just to listen to. In South India, very often there is a kind of chanting that happens in the temple, which is very special. So you can't say I won't enter a temple because I am, I am a secular being. I will, if they say that secular beings should not enter temples, I'll be banned from entering a temple. But still the temple holds music and musical traditions and culture of a very beautiful sort. We get married in the Hindu tradition. If you do have any kind of ceremony, it's the Hindu tradition. If people come home, you offer them kumkum, it's a Hindu tradition, because that's your way of wishing them good luck. You may, of course, now not do it. I may not do it now, but as an instinct, it comes when somebody comes home or leaves home. I'm a South Indian, so in South India, you offer kumkum as a saying, please go well and stay well. These are instincts. And then lighting a lamp, for instance, lighting lamps, I love lighting lamps, and that is considered to be part of the Hindu tradition. So in all this, I'm a cultural Hindu. I know Sanskrit. I understand shlokas, and I don't think they're bad. I think they're very beautiful shlokas, which are non-denominational, which people don't chant at all, but they are non-denominational chants. Like Asatoma Satgame, Tamasoma Jyotirgame, Mrityorma Amritam Game doesn't talk about any religion. It talks about the universal nature of life. And I also believe that the Buddha said so many wonderful things which are so true. So you can be a cultural Hindu or a cultural believer without being necessarily tacked to religious traditions and religious do's and don'ts and what religion dictates to you. You can still be. And Hinduism is a religion which accepts me even if I'm an atheist. Please let's not. So there's all the iron corridors that are being created in Hinduism is all non-Hindu. The Hindu is undefinable. The Hindu is all over the place. The Hindu is, you can choose to be with Manusmriti, you can choose to be against Manusmriti, you still remain a Hindu. You can choose to be with Kautilya, you can remain anti-Kautilya, you still remain a Hindu. You can be an atheist, still remain a Hindu. You can say, I don't believe in anything, you can still be a Hindu. All Hindus are allowed funeral rites, no matter what their preference may be. Why should we constrict this into the narrowest possible of definitions of a Hindu? We're losing touch with the spirit of Hinduism, what really Hinduism is all about.
What do you make of people who claim to be political Hindus?
Anything that enters the realm of politics in the manner it has is only a stepstone to power.
Yeah.
How do you use religion for power? And I don't think it's religion at all. It's just a cult. And this cult is used for power.
Early on in the book, you talk about your first encounter with the people whose rights you want to go and you want to fight for, people who you feel you want to represent, people who you want to mobilize. Take us through those early experiences where you realize that you come with your baggage, you come with a certain identity, you come with a certain way of doing things, and how gradually over the years, you just referred to your friend, how that perspective has changed for you over the years in all your interactions with people, working directly with people at the grassroots.
I'm very fortunate that I came in with a much greater sense of equality than my peers would have. I did come thinking I had something to give, which was a big mistake. Because you don't come to give anything, you come to learn. And that, of course, in the book, it's very clear. Those who have read it will know that I have many incidents which I've quoted. But I was asked to just go away. Women just told me, get lost. We don't want you. I was so shocked. I thought, here I am, I've come all the way to talk to them and they don't even want to talk to me. What will I do now? If they don't even want to talk to me, how am I going to work with them? Then I realized the timing was wrong. The subject was wrong. The place where I sought to talk to her, that place was wrong. And I didn't know her language, either in terms of just the language and in terms of the idiom. I didn't understand what her problems were. Why should she want to have anything to do with me?
Mm-hmm.
And she thought I was a nincompoop because I didn't know how to dig the earth. I didn't know how to tether the animal. I didn't know how to grow my own food. And she knew all that. So what was I coming to tell her? What was I coming to tell her? She could survive without me. There was no need, but I can't survive without her, really, if you truly ask me, because if she doesn't grow the food, what will I eat? But so we just go thinking that literacy is everything. We think literacy is education, which it is not. We go thinking that, they don't know anything. I'll tell them about politics. The first thing you do when you enter the village, you go and talk to the wrong people. You get so completely enamored of the people who are exploiters. You don't understand that they have a special way of talking to you so that they entice you and take you away from the real people whom you have come to serve. So you end up with a group of people whom you don't want to be with. And then you have a further problem because you've got to disengage with them and then also engage with the others. There is one incident which I've quoted about how Dalit community agreed to work towards setting up its own colony because they lived in such small houses and complete poverty. They gave money. I got the okay from the collector. The collector said, all right, we'll build this colony. But suddenly they removed the money from the bank and said, we just don't want it. And I couldn't understand what had happened. Because here was authority in the face of the collector coming and saying that there would be land allotted, that a new design would be built, he would find money for it, that a new colony would be built with all the facilities. Then it took me a month to realize that the person who had blackmailed them into saying no was the local upper class person who used to give them loans. And the loaning system and the indebtedness system, I did not realize was so lethal. Because you mortgage your land, you mortgage everything, and you borrow a little bit of money, and then you never return the capital because it's all compound interest. And in the end, they lose everything. So they were not willing to lose everything, even for that house that they were going to get. So they backed out. But for me to learn the intricacies of a rural economy and rural indebtedness and how they actually impact everything gave me the basis for planning in a manner in which they would contest not merely for achieving a superficial goal, but removing the basic inadequacies and inequalities that would never allow them access to that facility you gave them. Whether it's a well or whether it's anything else, very soon it will go to the person to whom they've mortgaged and their land or whatever, and from whom they've taken money. So how do you get out of indebtedness is a very important issue for villagers. And that's what led me finally to MNREGA and so many other laws, which was so, because without a daily income, you cannot get out of that kind of constriction, because you borrow for two things. You borrow for health and you borrow for food. Now, these are such vital things that without that you cease to exist. So you can't say to them, don't borrow.
You also talk about the modes of communication, when you mobilize people, how the rich oral tradition that exists, how that is used, how pamphlets are used, and in the age of social media, where I want to understand how WhatsApp and the mobile phone has impacted, mobilization and the means of communication when you're an activist.
Actually, young have been very strongly impacted by these things. But when push goes to shove, the physical formations still have an attraction far more tangible and greater than just exchanging notes on the social media platforms. The problem is that two things have contrived together: the social media and the huge political restriction on public formations, on public spaces, banning us from public spaces. We were banned from Jantar Mantar. And of course, MKSS then applied, went on a public interest litigation case to get back the space in Jantar Mantar. It, of course, was for everybody, but it was a case which we filed in Rajasthan. If they constrict us any further than they have, there'll be us to take on, because you have to have public spaces. You have to meet each other physically. You have to understand the nuances and as a woman, the look, the smell, the feeling, the hug, the exchange of songs, the singing together, the feeling of that power is extremely important for mobilization, and impossible without it. For that, we have to have a physical getting together.
You talk a lot about women. You worked with them closely. You've seen the women's movement. You've seen grassroots action. You talk about the intersectionality of multiple identities. And you say that it enables women to think laterally. And you write, the words women use, their style and concepts that emerge from them can often topple the male citadel, not merely by use of language, but by the thought itself. I want you to amplify this.
Again and again, there are points at which we are struggling on the streets, say, for a law. And a woman comes to you saying that my husband has been beating me up or raping me or whatever, the marital rape. The question is, will you ask the woman to shut up? Or will you ask her to concentrate on the political fight and forget about it? Or will you take that whole thing up and say, no, now stop the political fight. We have to resolve this first. So women can do both things together. Men can only do one thing at a time. Either say you take up the rape and go there, or you do this political struggle. There's no time to talk both. But women find the space. They find the space to discuss the rape in the middle of that political struggle, and also to formulate future action. So we are people who laterally think and can laterally think, because our life is full of lateral thinking. You have the child on your hip, you have the food on the stove, you have a person at the door, you have another child crying, or if it's someone like me, then you have the laptop or the computer or whatever I'm working on at this age, and then you have the telephone, and then you have somebody who's wanting something done, then you have an issue, then there's a meeting. So we deal with lateral issues far more competently than men do, because it's the way we are made as women. So intersectionality is part of our being. We have never really dealt with ourselves just as women, just as Dalits, just as mothers, just as daughters, just as wives, just as sisters, just as a student. There are periods of time when we say, no more, I'm going to take 1 hour off to be disciplined and sit together on one issue. That we do. But we never deny the fact that there is a responsibility to act in much more than one or two spheres of life.
The liberalization and all the policies that came post that, 1991, and the turning point in the way the Indian economy, the big turn that the Indian economy made, that was expected to that was expected to deliver fruits that would trickle down to the last Indian. And we did see hundreds of millions move out of poverty. But today, we also know that it has not solved India's problems or the big chronic problems of poverty and now the glaring inequality. When you were part of the National Advisory Council, and these were, coinciding with the 2 terms of the UPA 1 and the UPA 2, which is when we saw these acts that you've referred to get passed, whether it was the right to information, MNREGA, food security, and all these big legislations that you helped action and which we are still seeing the benefits of today, even though movements and activism has been, all of this this kind of public campaigning has been discredited in a very concerted, designed manner. Where do you think the big answers lie going forward, Aruna?
We have to go a bit international when we look at liberalization and its consequences. It came late to India, fortunately. We had a period when liberalization and international finance had to keep within boundaries of this country. I won't go into history, but today, liberalization in the form of convenience and in the form of convenience principally has taken over our lives. So many things have come because of liberalization. Your ATM card, cash money, it's your so many technological innovations. So that's why when you fight your Aadhaar card, are you also fighting your ATM card is an issue. I went to court, by the way, over the Aadhaar card. Are you willing to give up your ATM card? Are you willing to give up other cards? There's so many pieces of plastic. Is your whole life going to be determined by plastic? So when you talk about liberalization, we are talking about the kind of comfort zone and convenience that is given to a whole range of people without realizing the consequences of that kind of control with a plastic, which has led to huge frauds, by the way. Many people have been defrauded. Every third day, there is a case of a villager who's been defrauded of many lakhs of rupees in a small group. A small means a few thousands or many thousands that I know. It multiplies into quite a large number. You've been defrauded of lakhs of rupees because somebody rang up and said, what is your, give me, I'm checking from the bank, and or in all innocence, some number has been given and then the whole bank account is cleaned out. So I'm not saying that it's without its disasters, but everybody for comfort and convenience has accepted certain parts of that kind of development.
In fact, everything you have said and done for large parts of your life have been very unpopular, and even today are unpopular. So what is the argument you would make for people who still have an open mind, for them to understand that this
That's what I'm saying. One thing is that we cannot dismiss the whole thing. I think that dismissive language is got to turn around and look at my personal life. How many of these things am I willing to give up? Yeah. Am I willing to give up the fan? Am I willing to give up? For me, there's no AC, but for people, am I willing to give up the AC? Am I willing to give up by reading of a book? I fight Amazon. Should I buy from Amazon? I'm fighting Amazon in a campaign saying that their staff should be paid better. At the same time, I live in a village where nothing will reach except through Amazon. Should I buy it from Amazon or not buy it from Amazon? These are our moral questions that come in my class. But the poor people also have tremendous amounts of moral questions like this. So convenience and comfort have taken over. There is a very nice article in the New York Tribune, I think a long time ago, about this. Anyway, so that comfort has taken us over, so politics gets weaker. So when we are fighting these politics, we are also thinking, what are we going to do on the other side? So the middle class and even the workers have been bought into this framework. So they are there. What have the workers been bought into? EMIs. So you lose your property, you lose everything because you can't pay installments of 2 months on a motorcycle, 2 months on your house loan. Everybody's building houses. very fashionable houses, very different. You know, in Kerala, we used to say Gulf money has come. If you remember in the past, you were young maybe, we used to say Gulf money has come because the old Kerala houses were dismantled and new kinds of concrete houses came to be. Such houses are being built in my village, wherever I live in. You know, it could be a house in Delhi. It could be a house in, say, rural Bombay. It could be a house in rural Chennai or rural Bangalore, anywhere, adjoining the city, just about suburbs. Houses like that are being built. So when you look at all those things, you see why the rural people are also being sucked into the system, because their EMIs have to be paid. Young people have to pay education loans. In my time, you know, and I'm very proud of the fact that I only went to Delhi University and didn't go to any foreign university. Then I passed out of what I used to really cherish my university, that I came out well educated, rounded, well informed, capable of everything, passing not only the IAS exam, but having the confidence to deal with many things in life. Many people have asked me abroad, oh, didn't you study abroad? I said, no, I haven't studied abroad. I've only studied in India. Very proud of it. But look at what the educational system is turning out today. People who don't know, can't write, people who don't have any information, we are turning out numbers. Is this progress? Big question marks. Because, you know, they then are not capable of dealing with the kind of weight of development work we need in India or any other work we need in India. So therefore, for me, there are a number of questions of what the neoliberal dream has been, what it has sold us. And now we are recognizing the underbelly of the neoliberal dream. Unemployment, massive unemployment. One job of a peon in UP, thousands of people applied, PhDs employed for the role, job of a peon. It's the same everywhere. Unemployment of a phenomenal order in the country. So what will you do? These people are going to one day protest and protest very, very angrily because they've invested everything in the hope of this one job which will pay off everything. And you can't pay your debt. Our young people who, like me and all my peers, Aruna Roy, Bunker Roy, not that all of them, all the Roys are relations, Dunu is not a relation of mine, or, you know, so many others. We just walked into rural development, not having a debt. Of course, we made a choice not to earn too much money, but none of us had a debt to pay back. Now, how can you, with a debt of so many lakhs of rupees, come on a low-paid job or a job that will just cover your needs? You need to have enough to repay debts. So it's a vicious cycle. So when we say, what do you think of, I ask myself, what do I think of the youth today? Then I say that, you know, I was a free individual. The system has made them captive economically in a manner in which they can't
step out of that cycle,
yes,
right?
They have no choice to get out. And
so,
I'm sure in India, if we didn't have this kind of constriction, we could have made do. But despite that, in larger economic terms, whether it is South America, which is going back to welfare, whether in very many parts of Europe there is still welfare, in England there is still welfare. In England, the moment you turn 60, you get a pension and you get free. National health will not be allowed to be disenfranchised by the British citizens of UK, no matter what. Any political party tries to get rid of national health will go the way of all flesh. In the Netherlands and in Europe, pensions are really good-sized pensions that the elderly get. The elderly get care. So the words may change, but the notion of welfare will have to exist. Because without the welfare, the concept of a welfare state, democracy can't function. And if we can't have democracy, we are opting for dictatorships, then another kind of scenario faces us. So the choices are much more complex today than they were when I began working. But they have to be faced. And they have to be, instead of blaming the activist, you'll have to see the actual condition there. When you open your mouth, you're put in jail, you're spending. I had some figures which I can't readily give you, that the maximum numbers of inmates of jails are people who have overstayed their punishment time. I did one when I was STM in Delhi in Parliament Street courts. There was the High Court said to me, you got too many pending cases. So I quickly looked up all the cases and I found There are very harmless sections of the CRPC, which is now something else. Section 109, which says that vagrants are put in jail. And the police have to achieve a certain target, so they catch hold of anybody and everybody and just put them in jail. So I had a list and I looked at it and I dismissed cases of people who had stayed more than the required punishment already in jail. I said there's no need to hear this case. They've already, whether they're innocent or guilty, have borne the punishment. So I really and truly, both in section 107 and sections 109, which are restrictive, I dismissed cases and I released a number of people. What do you think the High Court did? It passed a stricture on me. Say, how could you dispose of so many cases? And not looking at the fact that the system is, so everything you touch needs reform. So there are two things we'll have to do, welfare and reform. Without this, there is no way. And MKSS is now looking at Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sanghathan.
Yes.
Is looking at how do you deal with labor in the new universe. Yeah. So we've had a very important law passed in Rajasthan,
yes,
called the gig workers law. And in gig workers, we are looking at your Zomatos and your Ola and your Uber and your Ola and all your various contractual labor who are given no guarantees at all. So it's only the aggregator and his website and this fellow, and they can do nothing. One day he falls ill, there's no security. He has an accident, there's no security. The car is his, the diesel is his, the petrol is his, the labor is his, and all he gets from that is the bare fare. So we looked at the work of Babha Adav in Pune, who did a similar thing for head loaders. They're called Hamals. He had a brilliant scheme about 40 years ago. And he set up something called the Mathadi board, maybe 40 years ago, called the Mathadi board. It's a tripartite board where there is the head loader, the coolie, the employer, and the government. The government has to act as arbiter and make sure, and of course there's some financial arrangements to make sure that the man who employs that coolie for only one day pays enough money to cover percentage of money to cover his health costs and his health insurance and his pension. So we introduced the same concept into this
gig workers.
And we said there must be a tripartite board with the aggregators, workers, and the government.
How's it working?
Government has passed the law.
Sorry?
Rajasthan government has passed the law.
Yes. How's it working? Because it was
waiting for the rules to be framed because the government changed. Now the big fight is to get the rules in place, but we will get it. And the first thing is to educate everybody. So never say die. Ask me.
Never say die.
But you have to find ways of dealing with everything. This will come, that will come, technology will come, social media will come. You have everything coming. Of course, I can't control the world. But I must see the possibilities and I must see where justice lies. And if these two things guide us, then there's always a way ahead.
You know, Aruna, I remember when we met last, I think it was when the RTI book was launched. And at that time, the political discourse, especially in the mainstream media, was about the concept of the urban Naxal, right? And I remember asking you, and how beautifully you explained to me, how can people who go and petition the courts, how can people who go and present in front of standing committees in parliament, how can these people be urban Naxals? What is a Naxal? How does a Naxal operate? How do these people operate? So then what is this word and what does it mean? So I want you today to, on a final note, there are many people who are beginning to see that things are not as beautiful as it can be, and definitely not for everyone, the way neoliberal economics has worked. What is an argument you would make to people who are still within that comfort zone and who are, we talk about that K-shaped recovery that we have had post-COVID, and who are on that upper stroke of the K? So life is going well, they're doing 2 foreign holidays, you're earning, you've got an apartment, you're probably making a second home. What is an argument you make to these people for the choices that you stand for? Because there is, so that so that we can keep talking, so that we can keep opening and find these spaces that you can keep working in. How do you make an argument to a person who does not see any reason to get out of their comfort zone and the conveniences that life has offered them?
I think there are, very many ways in which you can stay within your comfort zone with all your conveniences and still think of others. I do not think it's a mutually exclusive, steel enclosed cubicle.
But thinking of others can be in the form of
Wait,
charity.
I'm coming. But even charity is not bad.
No, sure.
Where is there charity today? Left, right, and center FCRAs are all being cancelled.
Yeah.
So we are all looking at foreign charity. There has been no, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, Anuradha, that we do not have systematic and organized charity in this country. We have CSR, but CSR is not charity. And we have donors. Donors is not charity. You must look at charity which goes by the condition of the individual first and then adjusts whatever you have to give legally and correctly so that that individual gets that money. So many people are going without adequate food. So many people are going around without adequate, so many things, health, education, etc. Even when the government offers you free facilities, free everything to access that facility, you need some kind of help and support. So the nature of even NGOs has changed in India. People are now looking at how do people access to welfare schemes? How do people access, whether it's MNREGA or whether it is in Rajasthan, we have a free health service now for all of us. How do help? What are the papers you have to access? What are the things? So, charity will also have to reinvent itself every now and then. And charity can be a very important part of all work. Let me tell you that again, every one of us is charitable at some time or the other.
Sure.
We may be the most hardcore believer in not having charitable institutions, but charity has its role. Just as development has its role, just as struggle has its role. And I will go back to Gandhi and say, he said Seva, Sangharsh or Nirman, the three kinds of public action, and he didn't say they were mutually exclusive. The same person can be in all three and the same person can be in just two or just one. And if you don't have that feeling of charity, when you see a hungry person on the road, when you see starved children at the traffic lights, when you see people lying on the road unwell and ill and not being able to access help. What happened to us during COVID? COVID was a time when we all realized how important charity was, how important concern was, because we ourselves became victims. We didn't get access to oxygen. We didn't get access to beds. Our young people died. What was it? What was the condition then? Where were we? So there is a universal point of view that where charity has a role to play, but what kind of charity is the discussion. Not that we shouldn't have charity.
The work you've done and you do, and the activism is for rights, which is in a completely different space. So what is the argument you would make for that? I take the point you make about charity.
I say that I am a rights activist by definition because I don't go asking donors for money. But I'm a very charitable person.
Right. So I'm saying
I feed people. I will go out of the way to fight for a person to get access to food, which is being given by a temple or a mosque or a gurudwara. When we go in hordes to Delhi and do struggles in Jantar Mantar, we go to the gurudwara for the langar. So let's not see them in watertight compartments. Let's just see them as positions in which you don't work on funding and positions where you work with funding, positions in which you think you just don't want to get involved in anything, just except give blankets and, food on a specific day. But I'm saying anyone who runs a soup kitchen is wonderful. All these programs the government is running now, starting with Jayalalitha in Tamil Nadu, when the Amma kitchen came. We have a kitchen here in Rajasthan. In 8 or 10 rupees or 12 rupees, you can get basic food. Baba Adhav had this fantastic kitchen called Mata in Pune, which has been feeding what is it called? It's called Kashtachi Bakri, which has been feeding tens of thousands of people. Whenever I go to Pune, I go to that kitchen to eat. Would you call it charity? Would you call it development? Or would you call it struggle? Because with an empty stomach, none of your hamals are going to work. And you want to give them a balanced diet. You want to give them enough dal. You want to give them enough rice. You want to give them millet rotis so that they get more strength than having this horrible, processed gehu ki rotis. So they all overlap and interlap. For the sake of an argument, because I don't take foreign funding and I'm not affected by the FCRA rules of the government of India, doesn't make me less charitable in my mind or my heart. See, charity as a notion is your human kindness. If you don't have human kindness, you can't work. And even as you struggle, that's why with the MKSS, everyone we have opposed and sat in dharna against, we've always gone by this principle that it's the office you fight, not the individual. It's the system you struggle against. Not a set of individuals. You can't do that. You can't do that. Because when you do that, you strike at your basic humanity. And if your basic humanity is finished, you may as well not live. So these are, of course, the tools which we use to categorize certain kinds of action. But I have respect for people who do charity. I have respect for people who do development work. Do it with integrity and ethics. Of course I have great respect for them. But it's not my work.
Make a case for your work, your approach to people who are not, who don't see it as not just relevant, who see it as an obstruction to their idea of their worldview.
Unless they dialogue with me, how will they know what is an obstruction? The primary fault line in our modern day world is that we come quickly to assumptions and we form these images which are completely two-dimensional. And we'll jump to conclusions about urban Naxal or Andolan Jeevis or whatever you call them without understanding who that person is or what that individual is doing. The first thing I would say to all of them is, let's talk. Let's dialogue. And I think this book is an attempt at a dialogue. It's an attempt to tell people that we are ordinary human beings. We just act because we can't not act when we see injustice, when we see ill health, when we see poverty. You also feel the same, I'm sure, but you can't act because of very many constrictions, but we act. So don't dismiss us. You'll have to come and talk to us and find out why we act. We can have a dialogue. We can differ, dissent. Dissent and difference is completely normal. That's something we should always have. But the point is, you won't dismiss it without being informed. So you have to make, to quote Chomsky, an informed choice. And in the informed choice, it's not only for your election and your vote, it's also for dismissing social structures, political structures that exist in the country. Social activism is important. Everyone is an activist at some point or the other. So the point is, people form that as a group to take on structural struggles. They are very difficult because you're fighting entrenched interests, you're fighting vested interests. So don't dismiss us and don't be frightened by us. We are absolutely normal people.
What I can do is keep talking. And thank you so much for making time. And for people, if you want to read about Aruna's life and everything that she's discussed here, but with much, much more depth, then this is what you need to reach for. Aruna, thank you very much. As usual, every time I speak to you, my mind opens up a little bit more. I stay within, my comfort zones and the convenience my life has offered me. But I'm so enriched by every time I hear you or I read what you're doing. And I have learned a lot.
Thanks for these conversations. And I think conversations are very, very important. So keep them going.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.